There are going to be a lot of people, in fact, probably the majority of people playing the game are not activist transphobes. The majority of people are probably just people who don't think about trans issues that much and have good opinions and feelings about the Harry Potter franchise and just want to play the game. You have to look into a person's broader political analysis of trans liberation to understand if they are transphobic or not. It does not make one inherently transphobic. And I will say, and I said this in a tweet, but the attacks that trans people face on a day-to-day basis because of the legislation being passed are magnitudes more extreme than anyone playing Hogwarts Legacy will ever see for playing the game. To over-focus on the so-called harassment people are receiving for playing Hogwarts Legacy, which we have not seen a lot of evidence to support, when trans people simply for existing and simply for defending their right to exist, defending their ability to access services that cis people are able to access with no problem, the idea that that is not a thing that we're going to be talking about and we're going to hyper-focus on the harassment people are getting for playing a f***ing video game is ridiculous to me. So I kind of wish I could have gotten this out a lot earlier because I've had these similar takes for a while. I know you've all been waiting patiently because so few people are talking about this that me talking about it, not only is it novel because I never give my takes about anything online, but it's also just a topic that is so niche that learning about it in this way could probably be better. We're talking about the wizard game, Hogwarts Legacy. And that is not a medical condition, that's a video game, is getting a lot of talk for a variety of reasons. And I had some takes, and there have been a lot of takes. There are some that I agree with and some that I don't. And I think the greatest problem here is the fact that charitability does not exist on the internet anymore. But we'll get into that. So when it comes to Hogwarts Legacy, I think the biggest thing people are focusing on is not so much are you transphobic for playing it, which I don't think you are inherently, but we'll get into that. It's not so much, oh, well, is a boycott potentially going to break J.K. Rowling's bank? Because I don't think anybody thinks that that's going to be the case either. And I also don't think it's just the whole solidarity thing. Because while each of those pieces have been part of the discourse, it seems like the greatest one that people have been focusing on, and the one that outlets have been reporting on, is the so-called harassment that people who are playing the game are getting from allegedly pro-trans activists or trans people, right? And from the evidence that I've seen, the reports of said harassment seem to be pretty overstated. I'm not going to lie to you. That's just not my opinion. That's the opinion of an article we're going to read, as well as looking into it a little bit. Now, it's not to say that no harassment has happened, because that's impossible. But people seem to have a difficulty differentiating between actual good faith criticism or, voicing of opinions on the topic and actual harassment. This is not just a problem unique to this discourse either. This happens a lot when it comes to content creators and their audiences, right? Like a content creator will say a thing, give a take, and the audience of people that don't like them will combat that in whatever way, either be it like good faith or bad. And then a bunch of the people from the original creator's audience will go into the comments of those public platforms and be like, hey, this is actually not how that went down. This is clipped out of context. This is not what he meant by this. If you look at XYZ, you'll see that it's actually the opposite of what you're saying. This kind of stuff. Or like, here's some additional evidence. And if that doesn't convince you, it is what it is. But that's not harassment. It is certainly possible that within that could also be harassment, which would usually entail being bad faith in your argumentation, outright insults or threats of violence. But those things happening are very, very rare in a lot of these instances. And it's the same for this one, too. There are some people out there that are popping off on the timeline, being a bit silly, making vague, violent shit. But, that's not the majority of people talking about the game. The majority of the people talking about the game are talking about it in the discourse that I was previously talking about. The three pieces. Are you transphobic for playing the game? Is a boycott of the game the reason why people don't want people to play the game because maybe it'll affect J.K. Rowling negatively and she is the Pope of the transphobes after all? Or is simply choosing not to play it in solidarity with trans people because of the connection of the IP to that Pope of the transphobes? Is that a good thing that people should engage in and yada, yada, yada? Those seem to be the main three things. And any discussion around that can, of course, involve harassment, but it doesn't seem like we're seeing a lot of it. So here's an article that I thought was quite good, published 2 days ago by Stacey Henley in thegamer.com, the authoritative source. Let's talk about bullying people for playing Hogwarts Legacy. The big news around Hogwarts Legacy is one cisgender streamer getting upset, which reveals the layers of bias around reporting on this game. The big news in the wake of Hogwarts Legacy launch is that a cisgender white girl cried about it. Nothing should surprise me with the Harry Potter game, but I will admit this is a bold new direction. Trans people and their allies are now bullies for explaining why they don't support the game. Victim cosplay is back in fashion. So this is not like an objective news article, by the way, when it comes to the fact that this person is obviously giving their opinions and being a bit snarky, but I still think it's a good article. This sentiment has been growing around for a while. Streamers and players who consider themselves good people are upset that after supporting Hogwarts Legacy, not everyone agrees with them. This lack of agreement upsets them, and so if you are behind this sinister campaign, you must be a dirty, rotten bully. I know the creator of this world uses her income and platform to help legislate lives out of existence, but also some people really liked her books 10 years ago. That's what it comes down to. And a lot of the cases, it seems to be that. Now, I don't know that it's that simplistic, but when it comes to, is a person transphobic for playing the game or whatever, I do genuinely believe that the majority of the people who are playing the game, which is many people, are people who are either not educated on trans issues or are just like playing the game because they have a childhood interest in it and they just want to be a wizard for a little bit, right? But to figure out if a person is engaging with the game or are transphobic in general requires more of an insight into their broader politics surrounding trans issues, their stances on trans liberation, etc., because simply playing the game doesn't inherently make you transphobic. And the idea that that is a thing that people believe is a bit ludicrous. I don't think most people who are on the don't play the game side actually believe that, but nuance is lost in conversations like this. It is certainly possible for people to be transphobic and then also play the game and like delight in the fact that they're playing of the game and the virtue signal that they're doing it is like making trans people upset or whatever. There has been like a picture of somebody who bought like 6 copies of the game. You really showed the transes, right? But you're going to have to, look into it a little bit more to figure out if the person is actually transphobic. But we'll probably get into more of that in just a second. So here's the major thrust of this whole harassment campaign that people are talking about. This came to a head when the channel Girlfriend Reviews, which touts itself as a wholesome place that, much like a certain mainstream gaming outlet, only considers whether a game is, quote, fun to play or not. A short clip of the game paused, where the boyfriend and girlfriend complain about comments leading to the girlfriend leaving, has become a figurehead for how trans people have morphed overnight from the world's victim into the world's bully. Was this person bullied? Did they actually even cry? Neither of these things have any real proof behind them, and yet this is one of the main news stories from the launch. I know Dexterto, the gaming news and kind of tabloid publication, talked about it in that way. The titular girlfriend suggests to her boyfriend that they take a break, then leaves. The clip doing the rounds does not show her crying, and the fact that the boyfriend elects to stay on stream and finish the combat area suggests she was not in the extreme emotional anguish others have tried to paint this as, or the boyfriend is a bad boyfriend, but we don't know. There's also no chat in the clip being circulated, meaning we don't know if the team are upset by people asking reasonable questions about their decision to support the game, which would not be harassment, like, hey, are you aware that this IP is attached to one of the biggest and most popular transphobes out there who is currently working with activist groups and supporting activist groups that are trying to legislate trans people out of existence? Are you aware of that? How do you feel about that? What are your thoughts on that? It is not the fault of trans people that the game Hogwarts Legacy and your playing of it has become political, by the way. If you're mad at the fact that the game seems to have an inherent political connotation, get mad at J.K. Rowling, because she's the one who has the offensive stance here. She's the one being offensive in the way that she is acting. She is supporting and friends with people who have literally used genocidal language when describing their disdain for trans people. It's not very good. Also, there seems to be a lot of racism and anti-Semitism baked into those people as well. I digress. So if you're mad at the fact that there's politics involved in the game, and your playing of the game is going to bring up political conversations when you're not trying to be political, get mad at J.K. Rowling. It is not trans people's fault. Trans people would be completely fine with J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter and whatever else she's working on if she wasn't using her status and platform to try to harm trans people. That's J.K. Rowling's problem. So reasonable question about the decision for this game that they do not want to answer, or whether there are more extreme messages lined with threats and insults. Having gone back and read the chat on their Twitch channel, it seems to be the former, and the vast majority of the chat are springing to their defense. Even if you account for deleted comments, the chat is clearly responding to fairly mild criticism rather than vulgar abuse. Ultimately, they were accused of supporting bigotry by supporting J.K. Rowling, but then when even explaining reasons against supporting the game is bullying, what does it even matter? The clip also includes a defense from the streamers of Roman Polanski and Michael Jackson and complains that they have, quote, a target on their back for being allies, so should have credit in the bank. They also call trans people the, quote, alt-left, which feels like a mask-off moment to me, but hey, they're allies, right? And I don't know that I've ever heard anybody other than Nazis use the term alt-left. There are some so-called centrists out there that I think have as well, like Tim Pool, for instance, but he regularly platforms like far-right people, ethno-nationalists, Nazis, etc., so like, he's not actually a centrist. He just pretends to be for clout. Like, I don't think alt-left is, like, the normie kind of talking point. I don't think that this is a thing that, like, people who are, like, apolitical are engaging with. And I don't know that it's being engaged with even with a lot of political people, including, like, liberals. It seems to be that that word has a right-wing connotation, which is what raises some eyebrows. It is certainly possible that they're not using it in that way, but defense of Roman Polanski kind of makes you question it a little bit, right? This is the endpoint of the shallowness of the hashtag Be Kind movement. On the face of it, be kind is good advice, but respectability politics and a fear of confrontation have twisted its meaning to become, quote, bury your head in the sand. On one side, you have people being kind and sweet and joyful who just want to play a game. Yay, positivity. On the other, you have a much smaller, already marginalized group pointing out that buying, streaming, or praising the game gives money a further platform and longer future to J.K. Rowling, who is on the record saying she feels empowered that people support her beliefs because they keep buying her products. And I will go over my broader thoughts on the Wizard game as well, in regards to, you know, it being supporting J.K. Rowling and all this kind of stuff. The first side, who just wants everything to be fun, are upset with the second side is pointing out the reality of the situation. That is a problem of J.K. Rowling. Once again, if you're mad about the fact that trans people are questioning people who decide to play the game, ideally in a good faith and kind way, that is J.K. Rowling's fault. J.K. Rowling has politicized trans existence and uses her platform to do so. She doesn't like it that trans people exist. She denies that they do. And she supports people who support measures to stop trans people from being able to access medical health care and all this kind of stuff. It's not good. It's a fairly abusive tactic as well to use. This whole, oh my god, like, we're trying to have fun here. We want to be nice, and all these trans people, they come on us with this harassment. Like, speaking of TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists, the idea that, like, oh my god, it's just a bunch of harassment or whatever is a common tactic used by TERFs and gender criticals. That movement has a very long history of weaponizing the so-called unreasonable, harassing, very rude, aggressive trans people, usually trans women, trans activists. And the point of that is to make trans people look unreasonable to the broader public. But the thing is, those concerns of so-called harassment are usually overblown and magnified for that reason. They are disingenuously used in order to smear the entirety of the population of trans people that are out there. That is the use case for this tactic. It is a kind of cry bullying, right? It is an abusive tactic. If that's not like something that resonates with you, think of also, if you were engaged with the 2016 primary, the Bernie bro rhetoric, right? The Bernie bro rhetoric was also this kind of cry bullying abuse tactic, in this case from liberals and people who didn't like Bernie Sanders because he was further to the left. They said that, oh my god, the Bernie bros online, like Elizabeth Warren trafficked in this, of course Hillary Clinton trafficked in this. The Bernie bros are misogynistic and they're so rude online and they're always so aggressive. But this is like cherry-picked examples. If people are passionate about the things that they believe in, and they're very excited in their rhetoric to believe in those things and advocate for their positions, that alone does not make what they're doing harassment or make it rude. And if you're countering bad faith critique, which often you will be if you're countering TERF critique or gender critical critique, you are being defensive in the face of already bad faith critique that is often aggressive as well. Like, if I'm responding to a TERF using, like, insulting rhetoric or whatever after they've literally told me that they support withholding access to medical health care to trans people, I'm not going to be nice to those people. I don't care about being nice to those people because they don't think I have a right to exist, right? But it should be said that not everybody playing Hogwarts Legacy is having that mindset. You have to be careful with how you're using this kind of this rhetoric, and you have to know who you're talking to. Unable to deal with the difficult emotions that come with wanting to support something morally compromised, they call the other side bullies for pointing it out. You made me feel bad, therefore you're bad. It's the logic of children. Meanwhile, the other side are regularly piled on with hate slurs, death threats, and all kinds of harassment, which is true. It's happened to me. very recently, actually, because I got quote tweeted by Matt Walsh, and a bunch of his meat riders came into my comments acting like bots and, calling me slurs and whatnot. I don't actually care about this very much. It is fun for me. If you've watched my stream or channel for any amount of time, I have fun shitting on transphobes and people being offensive to me. I find that entertaining. Not everybody's like that, though, of course. Not everybody finds my specific brand of entertainment value from that, right? Not by the original Be Kind side, but by a third side of trolls who spend their entire existence online attempting to make life miserable for anyone who is a minority, whom they deem to be woke or just whoever they feel like going after. So I have a tweet to that effect that I actually drafted before I read this article. I drafted it because I was continuing to think about it more in the way that I wanted to phrase my opinions, and also because it was like 2 a.m. Pacific time, meaning that nobody was going to be awake to see it, so I figured I might as well wait until people were awake to see it. So I'm happy that there are people that are also seeing this. Like, if you look in the Dexerto comment sections, which I should probably get up and probably will in a second, you'll see that there are a lot of people utilizing the so-called harassment from trans people over people playing Hogwarts Legacy as a way to smear all trans people as unreasonable. And they want to do this in order to further legitimize any kind of oppression against trans people in the public eye. So I wrote, it's worth noting that the right is actively magnifying the so-called bullying people are receiving for playing Hogwarts Legacy in an attempt to smear all trans people as unreasonable and mean to normies. Try not to play into that. Meaning that there are a lot of people out there that are like talking about, oh, well, people don't want to be harassed because they're playing the game and you shouldn't be harassing people for playing the game. I agree with that. But by talking about that without the additional caveat of, okay, where is this harassment? How is this harassment happening? Is a lot of this actually good faith critique or actual questions about somebody? Because getting good faith critique or questions about a certain thing is not harassment. It might make you uncomfortable because it's a political topic, because J.K. Rowling has politicized her own IP, but that's not harassment. If you're talking about it in that way, or like gloating over the fact that the Hogwarts Legacy video game is doing very well or whatever, I question your motives. As a trans person, I personally don't care if you play it or not. Like, have I already said that? I was talking about it earlier on stream. But that is my position. Boycotts rarely work, but I appreciate people not playing in solidarity with trans people like I am. So consumer side action very rarely has the impact that people engaging with it want it to have. We live in a society. There is no ethical consumption under capitalism. It is difficult for consumer side action to have an actual impact on the industries you are targeting. The way you usually are going to have the most impact is by engaging in direct action and mutual aid on the ground, and also pressuring through electoral means your elected representatives to draft legislation and pass legislation to address the concerns that you have in a systemic matter. That is going to be the best way that you're going to do it, right? Simply electing not to buy Nikes because they support Colin Kaepernick is not going to have a detrimental impact to Nike in such capacity that it's going to ruin them or whatever. But I have said, I don't think that the majority of people who are having questions about people playing the game think that such a boycott is going to, like, cripple J.K. Rowling's wallet or whatever. I don't think people think that. Which is why I wrote, boycotts rarely work, but I appreciate people not playing in solidarity with trans people like I am. Because I think that's the major thrust that people care about on the pro-trans side of things, on the don't play the game side of things. It's like, okay, well, you're not playing the game because you understand that the IP has been politicized by its owner, who is transphobic, who doesn't think trans people should exist. You're standing in solidarity by not playing the game. I think that's fine. I think it's fair if you do that. It is a virtue signal, but not all virtue signals are bad. The term virtue signal has a negative connotation because that's how right-wingers use it, saying, like, for instance, they think that, like, saying slavery was bad is a virtue signal or whatever, and they use that to smear people who think that, right? Like, virtue signals are not inherently bad, and that is a virtue signal, and I appreciate it. It's fine. I don't think it's, like, the be-all, end-all, but I appreciate it. I don't give a shit if you play the game or not, but I appreciate it if you elect not to because of that. That said, there is a difference between transphobic people who play the game and normies who grew up with a Harry Potter and want to be a wizard for a little bit. If there are going to be a lot of people, in fact, probably the majority of people playing the game are not activist transphobes, right? The majority of people are probably just people who don't think about trans issues that much and have good opinions and feelings about the Harry Potter franchise and just want to play the game. You have to look into a person's broader political analysis of trans liberation to understand if they are transphobic or not. It does not make one inherently transphobic. Now, I will say, if you do choose to play the game, like, it is what it is. I just hope you understand where trans people are coming from. And I will say, and I said this in a tweet, but the attacks that trans people face on a day-to-day basis, online and in person because of the legislation being passed, are magnitudes more extreme than anyone playing Hogwarts Legacy will ever see for playing the game. It is laughable to over-focus on the so-called harassment people are receiving for playing Hogwarts Legacy, which we have not seen a lot of evidence to support, when trans people simply for existing and simply for defending their right to exist, defending their ability to access services that cis people are able to access with no problem because of the politicization of their existence, they have to defend that. The idea that that is not a thing that we're going to be talking about and we're going to hyper-focus on the harassment people are getting for playing a fucking video game is ridiculous to me. Like, trans people are literally being legislated out of existence. I talk about this ad nauseum on all of my platforms. I follow the legislation. I signal boost people like Aaron Reed and Alejandra Caraballo who do really good work following a lot of this legislation. I cover the protests happening when I can and all this kind of shit. Those things are infinitely more important to worry about than this video game. So I had to add a caveat because people are like, oh, do you think we should be more nice to transphobes or whatever? What a pussy. So I think people are getting confused with my try not to play into that thing. I think I briefly touched on this, but when I say try not to play into that, I mean try not to play into the magnification of the so-called bullying people are receiving for playing Hogwarts Legacy. You know, the text of the tweet. I can see, however, that people would read that and be like, oh, try not to play into that? Oh, so you mean we shouldn't be, you know, going out and defending our right to exist? That's not what I'm saying, clearly. So I wrote, when I say, quote, try not to play into that, I mean hyping up the quote-unquote harassment people are receiving for playing the wizard game, not that people should be, quote, nicer to transphobes, lmao. Because I have seen people who are, as I've seen in the past at least, on the side of trans people, on the side of trans liberation, talking a fair amount about the so-called harassment being done. Like, oh, you shouldn't harass people. Like, yeah, no shit. You shouldn't harass people. But the harassment is being overblown. And to focus on that is playing into that narrative. So I added the addendum here. People seem to have difficulty differentiating good faith criticism and harassment. And this is a problem I see all over the place, not just when it comes to trans issues, not just when it comes to really any political issue. This is a constant problem no matter what you do. It is the famous tweet for a reason. You'll be like, yo, I like pancakes, and some random motherfucker comes in the comments and says, oh, so you hate waffles? That's an entirely different sentence. That meme, that happens all the time. Charitability does not exist on Twitter, on the internet at all. And it's really annoying to me. It's really annoying to me. People expressing discomfort with you playing a game connected to one of the most popular transphobes isn't harassment. I've not yet seen evidence that the bullying is as widespread as is claimed. I go on to say, if you know anything about me, you know I'm not exactly kind of transphobes. I am tiptoeing around Twitch TOS all the time, responding to people who are transphobic, who are activists in their transphobia all the time. If you watch me for literally 2 seconds, you will find this out. So the idea that you might have the opinion that I am like, oh, we should be nicer to transphobes is laughable. But maybe you weren't aware of me. Maybe you've never seen my content. That's reasonable. I'm a whomegalol nobody on the internet. I get it. But now you know. But I can tell the difference between normies who play the game because haha funny wizard and activist transphobes. You need to be able to understand a person's broader stance on trans liberation, and that changes how you engage with them. So if there is a person who is out there who is literally activist in their transphobia and don't think trans people should exist and are playing the game and are like, oh my god, I'm playing the wizard game as a virtue signal because they are anti-trans, then yeah, you can engage with that person calling them a piece of shit. I don't give a fuck. But if there's a random person out there who's playing the game, good faith critique is what you're going to be looking for. That's the majority of what we're seeing, and that's not harassment. It's not. Katie Montgomery, who I'm a big fan of, wrote, I get that this Harry Potter game has turned into some culture war red flag, but a lot of you are spending so much effort whining about it and totally ignoring the IRL politics going on, which is orders of magnitude more important. Spend your energy on fighting for our rights. I completely agree with this. And now I'm remembering, because I completely forgot about this before. When I say you need to understand a person's broader stance on trans liberation, and that is what changes how you engage with them when it comes to any criticisms or questions you might have about their decision to play Hogwarts Legacy, the biggest example I can think of is Hasan Piker, Hank Pecker, who I'm not a big fan of. Like, obviously, I'm not, you know, I don't know who that Hasan Minaj? Is that who you're talking? Hasan Piker, Hasanabi, right? Said on Twitter that he thought it might be a good idea for him to utilize his platform, utilize the popularity of the game, and the fact that many people are going to be playing it because it's open world Harry Potter. No shit, people are going to be wanting to play that. He thought that it might be a good idea for him to use that, criticize the game, criticize transphobes the entire time they played it with a bunch of other streamers, and raise funds for pro-trans organizations. So using the drama surrounding Hogwarts Legacy, which is the current discourse of the day, to drive engagement with a charity event to try to get as much money into the hands of pro-trans groups as is possible. Because it's kind of funny to do that, right? Oh, you're going to utilize an IP directly connected to a person and politicized by a person, J.K. Rowling, who doesn't think trans people should exist, to fundraise for that? That's pretty good. That's kind of funny. But he got a lot of critique about that, and I don't know that a lot of it was very constructive. And I think the charitability thing is what comes into question here. You need to understand a person's broader stance on the topic because that changes how you engage with them. So you could talk about any kind of ways Hasan might have been problematic when it comes to trans issues in the past. He's owned up to the fact that way in the past, like I think like a decade ago, he used to be transphobic and he's grown out of that. He's educated himself, he's learned. And that's good. But usually it's going to be more recent examples. I believe like one of the major ones was he was getting criticism from a bunch of trans people online, and he didn't see their criticisms as good faith or them engaging in good faith, whatever. Regardless of all of that, if you look at his broader body of work, you can understand very clearly that he is very pro-trans. He constantly is talking about pro-trans activism and his talking points in that. He's constantly defending trans people. He's constantly talking about the anti-trans legislation that is being pushed by Republicans in this country and around the world, frankly. So if you understand that, if you get all of that, then clearly Hasan trying to raise funds for pro-trans organizations using the drama around the game as a spit in the face to J.K. Rowling while pushing pro-trans talking points, aka pro-reality talking points, to the broader audience of people playing it, he's probably not transphobic for that. Call me crazy, but given all of that context, I don't think what he's doing there is transphobic. I don't think he's playing the game to be transphobic, but I also don't think that simply playing the game is inherently transphobic. I also don't think most people think that either. I hope, anyway. So I think that's a big problem that people need to kind of figure out for themselves on the left broadly online, because that's what we're talking about. But I think this can also, happen with interpersonal, in-person groups and organizations as well. Charitability and nuance seem to be lost on people. It could be because people might be used to a lot of bad faith criticism, so when they see good faith criticism, they kind of like just expect it to be bad faith, so they don't engage with it in a good faith capacity. They're not charitable because they're so used to being attacked all the time, like trans people are, by bad faith actors. It could be that they have a low opinion of the person already, so they don't care to be charitable. It could genuinely just be misunderstandings. But for some reason, people just take the worst interpretation of a person's statement without looking at the broader context of that person to try to figure out what they mean by that. And it's just not conducive to any kind of good discourse. And it's unfortunate. Anyway, so obviously I'm recording this at a later date because new stuff came up about the game that I was not privy to in the first place. There are many people who have been talking about J.K. Rowling's, flirting with antisemitism in regards to the design of the goblins in Harry Potter very early on. The ones that run Gringotts Bank, they essentially just look like Jewish caricatures, like anti-Semitic caricatures. And they are running the banks and controlling all the money in this area. It's very odd. And she has been facing pushback for that for a long time. Apparently, the person who was the lead developer of the game ran an alt-right or far-right Gamergate-esque YouTube channel and was eventually let go for reasons I'm actually not aware of, but was eventually let go. Also, recently, one of the main voice actors who voiced, I think, around 10 to 12 characters in the game is like a rampant misogynist who J.K. Rowling recently had a positive interaction with on Twitter. J.K. Rowling, Pope of the Turfs, who's apparently all about making sure women, having a good place in society, and she's a feminist and all this kind of shit, openly interfacing and giving positive affirmations to a rampant misogynist. This is not anything shocking from a TERF or gender critical, right? But there's also some other stuff that I was not aware of that I found. So if you're in the game, there are these pages you can find using Revelio. It reveals them, and it's like a collectible. I don't know if they have any significance to the broader story in terms of, like, do you need them to go on, or if they're just collectibles to give you more information about the broader environment and the lore of the game. But there's one called the Goblin Artifact, and this is the one that seems to be one of the best examples of this that I could find. Now, it is a dog whistle, and we'll get into it, but dog whistles are tricky. And the reason why they're tricky is because they're supposed to be. Essentially how dog whistles work, you're trying to say one thing, but you can't say that thing because you worry about societal pushback and all this kind of stuff. So you say something else that allows people who know what you're actually saying to get clued into it. That's why it's called a dog whistle, because only the people that know can hear it and know what you're saying. And then people that don't know will continue to push the dog whistle, potentially, without knowing it's a dog whistle. And that's how these kinds of ideas get spread. So the classic one that we've talked about before on stream, I believe, is 1488. This is an alphanumeric dog whistle. The 14 of that stands for the 14 words of white supremacy, and the 88 is in reference to the 8th letter of the alphabet H, so it's HH, aka the thing that people would say about the dictator in Germany in the 1940s, right? It's a Nazi dog whistle, and it is fairly abstract because of that. That's just one example. Also, Lee Atwater actually gave the game away in a 1981 interview. He was a Richard Nixon aide, I believe. So he said, and I quote, now I'm going to be bleeping the quote here because he says the actual N-word with a hard R over and over again because he was a racist white supremacist. So in 1981, Lee Atwater said, quote, you start out in 1954 by saying N-word, N-word, N-word. By 1968, you can't say N-word. That hurts you. Backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff, and you're getting so abstract. Now you're talking about cutting taxes, and all these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and a byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. We want to cut this is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than N-word. That is what he said. That is literally, he's talking about how it is advantageous for conservatives to utilize dog whistles because just saying the N-word hurts you now. This is where, modern conservatives using the term woke comes from. Woke is the same kind of rhetoric that is forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. It is the same thing. The way they always use it is in reference to black people being represented in a positive capacity in media, queer people being represented in a positive capacity in media. It is a catch-all dog whistle to essentially say that those people are beneath the people using it, and it's used to justify all manner of repression. But it's very abstract, right? The main thing that dog whistles have that is a benefit for the people that you're using them is if you go through the effort of trying to explain to people, especially normies, what the dog whistle is and what it means and how it means what it means, you sound crazy. You look like that picture of that person from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, the show I've never seen but will see at some point, with all the stuff on the wall, right? You sound like a conspiracy theorist, and that's the point. Because the people utilizing the dog whistles often are conspiracy theorists, and their actual beliefs are as batshit insane as that. So, it's very difficult to explain this. And I say all this before going into this particular dog whistle, or at least potential dog whistle, because it's pretty convoluted. Now, obviously, it is totally within the realm of possibility that it's not actually a dog whistle. But if it's not, then there is a significant amount of coincidences that really makes you wonder. So here is a screenshot in the game when you get the Revelio page of the Goblin Artifact. Quote, horns like this were used by goblins during the 1612 Goblin Rebellion to rally troops and generally annoy witches and wizards. This horn was discovered in the aftermath of the rebellion behind the Hog's Head Inn, with a wedge of gorgonzola stuffed inside, presumably to mute it. So this is the caption that comes up when you pick the Revelio page up, and it's also the caption that comes up in the collections tab in the game, right? And there are a bunch of these. This isn't the only one. But this is the one that seems to be potentially maybe a dog whistle. Now, you might be wondering why that is. Well, there's a bunch of reasons. The first one is that it's a horn, okay? And that alone is not enough. It's a horn. Horns have been used throughout time by a multitude of different people, cultures, whatever. But people are speculating that it looks kind of similar to a Jewish shofar, which is a horn that was used for Jewish religious purposes. It is blown at the beginning of Rosh Hashanah and at Yom Kippur as well. It has a lot of religious significance, and there is an argument to be made about the story of Joshua taking Jericho, about the shofar being blown when they took that city. So that could be the rally of the troops kind of thing that they're talking about. So that's one. And, you know, that alone, I don't think is enough. That alone is like, okay, well, horns are used and so whatever. And that's the common retort you'll get for that. But there's actually more than that. So if you pair that with the overall discourse that has been happening for a long time about the design of the goblins, specifically those that work at Gringotts Bank, being very similar to anti-Semitic caricatures of Jewish people, it makes you wonder a little bit. So to go back to the caption, it talks about a 1612 Goblin Rebellion, right? So a lot of people are saying that this could be a reference to the 1612 Fettmilch uprising, so I don't speak German, which were the events that led to, at 1614, a pogrom of Jewish people. That is another thing that people are talking about. Now, the main thing about this is you kind of have to know a little bit of history about this. So they say the 1612 Goblin Rebellion is in reference to the 1612 Fettmilch uprising. The reason why a lot of even like academic scholars will cite 1612 as the beginning of the uprising is because that was when the Holy Roman Emperor Matthias came to power. And he did a variety of things that could be seen as being friendly to Jewish people of the time. So what led up to the 1614 pogrom of the Judengasse, which was a Jewish ghetto, Vincenz Fettmilch and his supporters, who had anti-Jewish tendencies and sought anti-Jewish policies. These were all merchants, and they were trying to get, you know, a better shake in the ways that they thought they were having an unfair hand when it came to Jewish people. Eventually, in 1614, the pogrom does happen in the Judengasse, and the inhabitants of it were driven out and their houses were partly destroyed and looted. Eventually, Matthias, the Holy Roman Emperor of the time, issued a sentence against Fettmilch and his followers. Fettmilch and 38 others were accused of disobedience and rebellion against the emperor, but were charged with their persecution of the Jews. Fettmilch and 6 others were publicly executed on the 28th of February, 1616. And on the 28th of February, 1616, Jews who fled were led back into Frankfurt by imperial soldiers, right? After that, the Judengasse gate was given a stone imperial eagle with the added inscription, protected by the Roman imperial majesty and the Holy Empire. So the reason why 1612 is often cited when it comes to the beginning of the Fettmilch Rebellion is because Matthias becoming the Holy Roman Emperor led to a variety of things that the people who are anti-Jewish at the time, he was giving Jewish people a better shake, I guess. I don't know that if he was pro-Jewish. He remained throughout the beginning of the uprising from 1612, 1613. He was more, you know, on the fence, more in the center, right? So that's why 1612 is cited. So people will always be like, oh, well, it can't be a reference to the 1612 Fettmilch uprising and the pogrom in the Judengasse because that actually happened in 1614, and it's 2 years off, which is enough to completely sweep away any claims of an anti-Semitic dog whistle being... Almost every place you see it, the uprising is cited as beginning in 1612, culminating in the 1614 pogrom, right? So I don't think that's a good enough response, but that's a response a lot of people are getting. So I think that alone, theoretically, should be enough to, along with the history of anti-Semitic caricatures that have been, you know, argued over for a long time when it comes to the goblins in the wizarding world, I think that alone is enough to raise some eyebrows and have some genuine questions about it. Pair that with the fact that the lead developer was a Gamergate far-right YouTuber, and a lot of those people ended up becoming Nazis, or at the very least, white supremacists. It raises some eyebrows. So that, I think, is as far as you really need to take it. Unfortunately, like I say, it does require a little bit more knowledge of the history. The fact that 1612 is the beginning of the Fettmilch uprising, and then 1614 was the pogrom on the Judengasse, that discrepancy there gives enough of an amoebic quality to the claim that allows the people who seek to discredit the idea that it might be an anti-Semitic dog whistle to kind of muddy the waters and be like, oh, well, surely it can't be that. This is a bit more abstract, but it also, you know, is worth looking into. So the screenshot... The description of it in the game says, the horn was discovered in the aftermath of the rebellion behind the Hogshead Inn with a wedge of gorgonzola stuffed inside, presumably to mute it. This is interesting and also incredibly convoluted and requires you to understand how cheese is made and also Jewish dietary laws, the kashrut. So the primary law being talked about here is that under the kashrut, you cannot mix meat and meat derivatives with milk and milk derivatives. And the way that cheese is commonly made is with animal rennet, which is an animal product, a meat derivative, so you cannot make cheese and have it be kosher using animal rennet. Now, there are microbial rennet and also synthetic that you can use in the modern day, and were also in the time, trying to be used then too, and like developed then too, but the primary way that cheese was made was with animal rennet. Also, under Jewish law, non-Jews cannot make kosher food, even if they follow every single kashrut practice, without the oversight of a rabbi or a Jewish person. So there is an argument then to be made that the fact that it was stuffed with that cheese could be potentially kind of similar to how post 9/11, the Islamophobic people were talking about like dipping bullets in pig's blood because it is haram to eat pork in Islam, right? It is similar to that. But that's not the only thing. And then you get even more abstract, because that I don't think alone is enough. It's just a piece of cheese. So then going on with that, Gorgonzola is made with milk fats, which is unskimmed cow's milk. So in German, you could... so stupid. In German, you could translate fat milk to fat milk, right? Or Vincennes fat milk and the fat milk uprising. So there's just another potential connection in the web of fucking dog whistle that this could possibly be. But that's not really one that I would focus on. I think the dates are enough as long as you can describe the historical significance of 1612 being the start and 1614 being the actual pogrom. Also, it was found behind the Hogshead Inn, and pork is also not kosher. So, it's very convoluted, but I think it's worth bringing up. There are also claims being made about the entire lore, the story of the game, potentially being based around blood libel. Now, that is entirely more convoluted than everything I just talked about, so I will not be getting into it, but I'll leave a link to a thread about it in the description if you want to look into that as well. I don't know that in terms of like rhetorical ways you're going to talk about the potential for anti-Semitic dog whistles, I would go to that one. I do think that the goblin artifact is enough. But that's the trouble with dog whistles. They're very sneaky. They're difficult to identify for a lot of people. They're also difficult to explain for a lot of people. Because if the people are not already in the know, you sound insane. It is what it is. That's why right-wingers use it. Because they are too cowardly to say what they believe with their chest. Because luckily, at least, in society, we in some ways have progressed to the point where just saying the N-word or saying you're a Nazi hurts you. Societally, they have to use dog whistles in order to continue to spread their message because they're all pussy bitches. And it just leads to things like this that are really difficult to analyze. But yeah, kind of doing some investigative journalism. I first saw a thread about this on Twitter, and I got pretty interested in the potential for it being an anti-Semitic dog whistle. And the reason why is because I'm interested in learning more about the dog whistles that bigots, racists, anti-Semites, etc., use, because it is beneficial to know about them to be able to combat them, right? So it's just very interesting to me. And I actually ADHD hyper-focused on it until like 9 in the morning, learning as much as I could about it. And I actually took notes on it. I also have a couple, the metro.co.uk and Daily Dot also wrote articles about the potential for the Goblin artifact to be a anti-Semitic dog whistle. But I learned a lot about the Fat Milch Uprising and the Judengasse. I also, and I took notes on what I could see. I found a bunch of shit, and I also learned a lot about how cheese is made and Jewish dietary law. That is interesting. I don't know. It's interesting to me. It is good to know the enemy. In this case, anti-Semites, Nazis, conservatives, Republicans, but I repeat myself. It's good to know the enemy and the tactics that they use. How does knowing about them help combat them? If you can identify them, it makes it so that you can't push them by accident, which is one of the benefits of dog whistles, of people pushing them by accident without knowing they're a dog whistle. That's one of the ways. Also, if you're doing any kind of explanation about them, obviously it seems pointless to do it, and I talked about that in the video, but it's also important to know. And if you could try to explain it, which is why, like, you notice in my rhetoric there, I wasn't like, this is an anti-Semitic dog whistle, and the entire game is anti-Semitic, and J.K. Rowling is... I didn't do that. I was like, oh, well, this might be people are saying this. You can't be super like authoritative about it. I can be when it comes to the 1488 dog whistle, the alphanumeric thing that Nazis use all the time. I can with that because it's a lot more simple and not as convoluted. But the goblin artifact dog whistle, the potential for it to be that, is very convoluted. So I cannot say with any absolute certainty that that's what that is. This is all just speculation. Anyway. Oh, I mean, I do believe that scratch a transphobe and an anti-Semite bleeds is very true. I think that is a true statement in my time of watching transphobes operate online. Scratch a transphobe and an anti-Semite bleeds seems to be a very consistent theme. And the reason for that is because anti-Semitism and transphobia go hand in hand, historically speaking. The first books that were burned were at the German Institute for Sexual Health, which was founded by a Jewish man, Magnus Hirschfeld, who was gay. And the first vaginoplasty was done there. A bunch of gender and sex-related study was done there. And the books that were burned there were on that, and it was targeted for that reason by the Nazis. Also, the common Jewish conspiracy theory of so-called globo homo, meaning the anti-Jewish conspiracy theory, the common global homo thing that Nazis use and talk about, where they purport that the Jewish people, they're forcing everybody to be gay, and they're trying to weaken the Western society by pushing all this queer propaganda to make people gay and therefore weaker, some shit like that. That's literally anti-Semitism and transphobia, queerphobia broadly going hand in hand, all the way back in the days of the Nazis, not just neo-Nazis of the modern day. And yeah, queer people were also put in concentration camps. I guess I'll add what I just said about that into the video. Also, we've had a video about this before. I think it's called How Transphobia Melts Your Brain or something. If you want to learn more about the history of anti-Semitism when it comes to transphobia and queerphobia, and the fact that they seem to lock together and interface with each other fairly frequently, there'll be a link to that as well. That's all I wanted to say. I think I will wrap it up there. Also, just to end on a positive note, in a previous video, we talked about how the Oklahoma Capitol had a bunch of pro-trans people in it who were peaceful, and that's super cool. And also Ben Shapiro wet his little diaper over it because he thought it was like Jan 6, even though it was not even close. We also have the Nebraska State Capitol having a protest to oppose anti-trans legislation as well. Legislation seeking to restrict access to medical health care, which are the standards of care agreed upon by literally every single major medical organization that studies this shit in Nebraska. They're trying to limit it from trans youth. And this is good to see. I think they're saying trans people belong, and that's very true. All the way down in Nebraska, there's a lot of pro-trans people out there, brother, and in Oklahoma, let me tell you. Very good to see. Anyway, take care of yourselves. Try to be a bit more charitable. You don't have to extend charity to people like Matt Walsh or Ben Shapiro or their fans. If you look at their broader commentary on a certain topic, you should be able to find out whether or not they're actually engaging in good faith. But if a person is ostensibly on the left, I think you should look deeper into the things they're saying and see if this is a good faith critique or whatever that they're giving, and kind of be more charitable in that way. There are people on the left who abuse the aesthetics of leftism in order to try to make them more trustworthy while they push right-wing talking points. A lot of grifters do this, like Jimmy Dore, like Tim Pool with the centrism shit even, and that's quite cringe. But I don't think that that's going to be the majority of people, and I think it should also be relatively easy to figure that out. I think it's fairly easy to figure out a person's broader political ideology and talking points, and like reference that with their talking points to find out if they're, you know, worth engaging with in good faith or not, or if they're engaging in good faith or not. Anyway. This video is kind of called as Fallen Lulu. Thanks so much for retweeting nearly everything I post. You really are the ideal Twitter follower. Everybody else take notes. If you would like to be the next Connor Callout, all you can do is follow me on Twitter at ConnorCZ, retweet my video links when they go live. Remember to subscribe to the channel, put on notifications on, hit the bell, leave a like if you'd like, comment something down below about how the Wizard game is being talked about too much and outrage marketing is a fuck, and have a good day.